The Galactic Conclave had ruled the stars for 12 million years, and all that time, they had never been wrong about anything important. 17 elder species sat on the High Council, beings so ancient that they had watched younger races crawl out of their primordial oceans and take their first stumbling steps toward the stars. They had seen empires rise and fall like waves upon a cosmic shore. They had witnessed the birth of suns and death of galaxies, and they kept their most sacred warnings carved into tablets of neutronium, stored deep within the vault of eternal truths where no one could ignore them. The oldest warning in the vault spoke of a small blue world orbiting a yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of absolute terror. When you find the third planet of the yellow star in Sector 7G, you must leave it untouched forever. For you must never contact them, never observe them, and never provoke them under any circumstances, because the architects learned this lesson. And the silence that followed their mistake speaks louder than any warning we could ever inscribe. For millions of years, every species in the conclave had obeyed this warning without question. The architects had been the most powerful beings the galaxy had ever known, capable of reshaping stars and creating life itself. Yet something on that small blue world had ended them so completely that not even their memory remained. But time has a way of turning fear into curiosity, and curiosity into arrogance. Ambassador Kethvorin of the Volanthi stood before the High Council on the day that would doom them all, his crystalline body catching the light of 1,000 holographic displays as he made his case for first contact with Earth. The Volanthi were among the youngest of the elder species, having joined the conclave only 3 million years ago, and they still possessed the hunger that older races had long since forgotten. These warnings are 13 million years old, Kethvorin declared, his voice resonating through the chamber like music made of breaking glass. And they were written by species who feared shadows and jumped at whispers in the dark. He gestured toward the holographic image of Earth floating in the center of the chamber, a beautiful marble of blue and green and white that seemed almost peaceful. Look at them, he continued with contempt dripping from every word, because these humans have barely achieved faster than light travel, and their civilization is only 10,000 years old, which means they are infants compared to us, and they are children playing with toys they do not understand. Elder Moreth stirred from her meditation platform, and the entire chamber fell silent. The last of the dreaming ones rarely spoke anymore, preferring to drift through visions of possible futures. But when she did speak, even the most arrogant ambassadors listened. Her form was difficult to look at directly because she existed, partially in dimensions that other species could not perceive. And her voice crackled like dying stars and carried echoes of futures that might never come to pass. The architects were not children, Moreth said slowly, each word heavy with the weight of millennia, and they seeded half this galaxy with life, creating species that still worship them as gods even now. Yet something on that small world unmade them so completely that we cannot even find their bones. She turned her impossible gaze toward Kethvorin, and the Volanthi ambassador felt a chill run through his crystalline structure. Despite himself, the warning does not say they were dangerous when it was written, Moreth continued, because it says never to provoke them, which means the architects saw what they could become. And they were so terrified that they left us this message across 13 million years. Superstition, Kethvorin dismissed with a wave of his hand, though his voice wavered slightly, because we are the conclave, and we have conquered every challenge the universe has thrown at us. So surely we can handle one primitive species on one insignificant world. The debate raged for 17 standard hours. The older species urged caution, pointing to the warning and the mystery of the vanished architects, while the younger species sided with Kethvorin, arguing that the conclave had grown stagnant and fearful in the end. The vote passed by the narrowest of margins. First contact protocols were authorized for Earth, and Ambassador Kethvoran was given command of the diplomatic mission as the council members filed out of the chamber. Elder Morith remained motionless on her platform, staring at the holographic image of Earth with something that might have been sorrow. "You do not understand what you have done," she whispered to the empty room, because the warning was never about what humanity is right now. She closed her eyes and saw fragments of possible futures. Images of fire and chaos and change spreading across the galaxy like a plague that could not be stopped. It was about what humanity becomes when you give them a reason to show you what they really are. In the vault of eternal truths, the neutronium tablets sat in darkness, their warnings unheeded for the first time in 12 million years, and across the galaxy, on a small blue world that had no idea what was coming, 8 billion humans went about their daily lives, completely unaware that they had just become the most important species in the universe. They built their cities and raised their children and dreamed their small dreams, never knowing that ancient beings had feared them for millions of years. They did not know that they were about to be tested in ways they could not imagine, and they certainly did not know that they would pass that test so spectacularly that the galaxy would never be the same again. But that is the thing about humans that the conclave never understood. Even after everything that happened, humans do not need to know they are being tested. They do not need to prepare for challenges that have not yet arrived, because when the moment comes, when their backs are against the wall and everything they love is threatened, humans find strength they never knew they had. The architects had seen this potential 13 million years ago, and it had terrified them so much that they left warnings carved in neutronium. The conclave had grown too arrogant to listen, and Ambassador Kethvoran, standing on the bridge of his mighty dreadnought as it prepared to make the journey to Earth, smiled with the confidence of someone who had never been truly afraid in his entire existence. He would learn fear soon enough. They all would. The Volanthi dreadnought Eternal Supremacy emerged from hyperspace above Earth's Pacific Ocean on a Tuesday morning, and for a brief moment, the entire planet held its breath. The ship was 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that could crack continents and shielded by technology that humanity could barely comprehend. And it hung in the sky like a message from gods who had come to deliver judgment within hours. Every military on Earth had pointed their weapons at the vessel, and every government had begun emergency protocols. And every person with access to a screen was watching the greatest moment in human history unfold. Ambassador Kethvoran transmitted his greeting in every human language simultaneously, his crystalline form appearing on billions of screens as he welcomed humanity to the galactic community. He expected panic and chaos and perhaps some primitive attempts at resistance instead. He found something that confused him deeply. The humans were calm. Their leaders responded with measured words and careful diplomacy, asking questions and requesting time to consider the implications of first contact, and within a week, formal negotiations had begun. Kethvoran interpreted this as appropriate deference to a superior civilization, and he reported to the conclave that the humans were proving to be cooperative and eager to learn their place in the galactic order. He did not notice the way human eyes tracked every movement of his crew. He did not see the subtle probing questions hidden within their polite conversation, and he certainly did not understand that humanity had spent its entire existence preparing for exactly this moment, reading science fiction stories about alien contact and debating in endless forums about how to handle first contact scenarios. The humans had been rehearsing this meeting for generations. Treaties were signed over the following months, and humanity accepted protectorate status within the conclave, which meant they would receive guidance and technology in exchange for certain contributions to the galactic economy. Thorvern smiled as he watched the human delegation sign the documents, thinking that this was the easiest conquest in Conclave history, and that the foolish warnings about Earth had been nothing but primitive superstition. For 30 years, Earth integrated into galactic society, and everything seemed to go exactly according to plan. Humans proved to be adequate laborers, surprisingly creative entertainers, and unexpectedly competent engineers who occasionally solved problems in ways that puzzled their alien supervisors. The Conclave carefully restricted human access to weapons technology, allowing them only defensive systems that pose no threat to elder species. And humanity accepted these restrictions with what appeared to be humble gratitude. Trade flourished between Earth and the wider galaxy, and human culture spread to dozens of worlds. And alien tourists began visiting Earth to experience the strange customs of this fascinating primitive species. Kavaran was promoted for his successful handling of the Earth situation, and he gave speeches about how the ancient warnings had been nothing but outdated superstition. And other young ambassadors began advocating for contact with other restricted worlds. Everything was perfect until the harvest quotas were announced. The Conclave had been facing resource shortages in the outer reaches for several decades, as mining operations struggled to keep pace with the demands of 17 elder species. And someone on the Economic Council had a brilliant idea. Earth's population had grown to 12 billion under Conclave protection, and many of those humans possessed skills that were desperately needed in the labor colonies of the Kareth. Mining networks. A simple reallocation of resources would solve the shortage and demonstrate to other protectorate species the benefits of Conclave membership. 3 billion humans would be relocated to mining colonies across the galaxy. Families would be separated according to skill optimization algorithms, and any resistance would be managed through standard pacification protocols. Ambassador Kethvor was chosen to deliver the terms to Earth, and he approached the task with the confidence of someone who had never seen humanity do anything but comply. He stood before the United Earth Council in their Grand Assembly Hall, surrounded by holographic displays showing the efficiency projections and labor allocation charts. And he explained the quota system in the same tone one might use to discuss weather patterns. The Conclave has determined that your population distribution is inefficient, he announced, and 3 billion of your people will be relocated to serve the greater good of galactic civilization. He smiled, expecting the same quiet acceptance he had always received from these cooperative primitives. Instead, he watched something strange happen to the faces of the human delegation. The nervousness that had always been present in their eyes simply vanished. Careful deference they had shown for 30 years evaporated like morning dew, and what replaced these things was an expression that Kethvorin had no framework to understand. Something cold and hard and utterly without fear. Secretary General Yuki Tanaka was a small woman who had always seemed slightly overwhelmed by her position, and Kethvorin had privately considered her to be one of the weaker human leaders. But when she spoke, her voice carried an authority that made the Volanti ambassador take an involuntary step backward. "No," she said, and that single word fell into the chamber like a stone dropped into still water. Kethvorin blinked his crystalline eyes in confusion, because no protectorate species had ever refused a direct conclave order. "This is not a negotiation," he replied slowly, as if explaining something to a child, "because the conclave has decided, and protectorate species do not have the authority to reject these decisions." Tanaka smiled, but it did not reach her eyes, and Kethvarn suddenly felt something he had not experienced in 300 years of diplomatic service. He felt afraid. "Then the conclave has made a mistake," Tanaka said. "Within 6 hours, every Volanti vessel in the Sol system had been captured, disabled, or destroyed. The eternal supremacy the mightiest warship the Volanthi had ever built, was boarded by forces that moved through its corridors like ghosts, using weapons that should not have existed and employing tactics that treated the laws of physics as mere suggestions. Getham found himself restrained in his own command chamber, watching in horror as humans stripped his vessel with calm, methodical efficiency. "This is impossible," he whispered, his crystalline form flickering with distress. "Because we monitored your technology for 30 years, and you had nothing that could do this." A human soldier paused in his work, his face hidden behind a tactical visor that glowed with unfamiliar symbols. "You monitored what we let you see," the soldier replied. "And you saw exactly what we wanted you to see. But why would you hide your true capabilities from us?" The soldier laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Did you really think a species that went from horse-drawn carts to nuclear weapons in a single century just stopped advancing when you showed up? We read your histories, Ambassador, and we saw what the Conclave does to species that show their full strength too early." Kethvorn stared at the human, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. "You were never really our protectorate," he said slowly. "No," the soldier confirmed. "But you were always our intelligence source, and we learned everything we needed to know about your supply lines, your force deployments, your political weaknesses, and your technological limitations for 30 years. We smiled and nodded and played the role of grateful primitives, and you never once suspected that we were taking notes on how to destroy you." The soldier leaned closer, and Kethvorn could see his own terrified reflection in the dark visor. "The Conclave made one critical error," the human said quietly, "because you assumed that a species that had never been conquered must be weak. You never considered that maybe we had never been conquered because everyone who tried is dead." The Conclave's response to the Earth incident was swift and absolute, or at least that was what they intended it to be. Within 3 standard weeks of losing contact with Ambassador Kethvorn's fleet, the High Council had authorized the largest military operation in galactic history. 12 battle fleets from 9 elder species converged on Sol System, comprising 40,000 warships armed with weapons that could shatter moons and tear holes in the fabric of space itself. The Volanthi sent their entire reserve fleet, burning with shame and rage over the humiliation of their lost dreadnought. The Morvathi contributed their dreaded planet crackers, vessels specifically designed to render worlds uninhabitable, even the reclusive. Kithrani emerged from their isolation to join the armada, their living ships pulsing with barely contained fury. It was enough firepower to turn Earth's sun into a cooling ember and reduce every planet in the system to scattered dust. The fleet admirals argued among themselves about who would have the honor of firing the first shot, and betting pools formed among junior officers about how long the humans would last before surrendering. No one expected resistance. No one prepared for what actually happened. The combined fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Sol System, their sensors immediately scanning for the human vessels that had somehow defeated Kethvorn's forces. They found nothing. Earth was gone. The entire inner system had simply vanished, leaving behind empty space where planets should have been. And the only trace of human presence was a network of small automated beacons drifting through the void. The beacons activated simultaneously, broadcasting a single message in every known galactic language. "We gave you a chance to leave us alone, but you did not take it, and now we are coming for you." Then the beacons self-destructed, and the greatest military force the galaxy had ever assembled found itself with absolutely nothing to shoot. Fleet Admiral Torath of the Morvathi ordered his ships to spread out and search for any sign of the missing planets, while analysts desperately tried to understand how an entire star system could simply disappear. But the humans were already long gone, moving through space in ships that the Conclave could not detect. Using drives that operated on principles the elder species had never discovered. And they were not running away. They were going hunting. Over the following months, impossible reports began flooding into the Conclave from every corner of the galaxy. Supply convoys carrying essential materials to the outer reaches vanished without trace. Their distress signals cut off mid-transmission. Communication relays that had operated flawlessly for millions of years suddenly went dark, leaving entire sectors unable to coordinate their defenses. Agricultural worlds reported subtle changes in their weather patterns that caused crops to fail in cascading sequences that seemed almost designed to cause maximum suffering. Mining operations suffered accidents at rates that defied statistical probability, and each accident somehow damaged the exact equipment that was hardest to replace. Financial networks experienced data corruption that could not be traced to any source, causing economic chaos that spread faster than it could be contained. The humans were not fighting a war in any way that the Conclave understood. They were not trying to destroy the enemy, military, or capture territory, or force a surrender. Instead, they were systematically dismantling the infrastructure that allowed galactic civilization to function. Cutting the invisible threads that held everything together, Elder Morath watched the reports with growing horror. And she finally understood what the ancient warnings had truly meant. They are not a warrior species, she announced to the emergency council session, her voice heavy with the weight of terrible knowledge. Because warrior species fight battles and seek glory and can be defeated through superior force. She pulled up holographic displays showing the pattern of human attacks, revealing a web of precision strikes that seemed almost random until you looked at the connections between them. Humans are persistence predators, she continued, which means they do not fight their enemies in open combat, but instead exhaust them through endless small attacks that never stop coming. They do not need to destroy your fleet when they can destroy the fuel depot that supplies it. They do not need to conquer your world when they can simply wait for you to starve. The Volanthi War Minister slammed his crystalline fist against the council table, sending cracks spider webbing through the ancient surface. Then we overwhelmed them with numbers, he screamed. Because we have 40,000 ships, and they cannot have more than a few hundred. So we simply hunt them down and destroy them through superior force. Morath turned her impossible gaze upon him, and the War Minister fell silent despite himself. You still do not understand, she said quietly. Because our fleets need fuel, our soldiers need food. Our economies need stability, and our societies need order to function. Humans need none of these things. They will eat their own dead before they stop fighting. They will burn their own worlds to deny us resources. They will sacrifice everything they have and keep coming, because that is what humans do when they are angry. She pulled up more data, showing adaptation rates that should have been impossible in 3 months. They have learned more about our weaknesses than we learned about theirs in 30 years. And they are sharing that information freely, with each other, with species we have subjugated, with everyone who has ever been wronged by the Conclave. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. What are you saying? Asked the Kethrani representative, her living ship shuddering around her in response to her distress. Morath closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they held something that might have been despair. I am saying that the humans are not trying to defeat the Conclave, she replied, because defeating us was never their goal. They are trying to infect us. Every subjugated species in the galaxy is watching what 12 billion primitives are doing to the mightiest civilization in history. They are watching us lose control. They are watching our fleets chase shadows while our economies crumble. And they are taking notes. She gestured at the displays, showing reports of unrest from a dozen protectorate worlds. The humans have given them something far more dangerous than weapons. They have given them hope. And hope, once planted, can never be uprooted across the galaxy in ships that should not exist. Human commanders shared intelligence and coordinated attacks and planned operations that would take years to complete. They knew they could not defeat the Conclave in open battle. They knew they could not match the firepower of 40,000 warships, but they also knew something that the elder species had forgotten over millions of years of unchallenged dominance. Wars are not won by the side with the most guns. Wars are won by the side that refuses to stop fighting, and humans had never stopped fighting anything in their entire existence. The Galactic Conclave, which had stood united for 12 million years, shattered completely in the third year of the human war. It did not fall to military conquest or overwhelming force or any of the traditional methods that empires used to destroy each other. It fell because the humans had shown everyone else how to say no. First domino was the Karath, an insectoid species that had served the elder races as laborers for 600,000 years. They had been the backbone of the galactic economy, operating the mining networks that produced 60% of all refined metals. And they had always been considered the most reliable and obedient of the subjugated species. No one had ever asked what the Karath wanted, because no one had ever imagined that insects could want anything beyond service to their betters. But the Karath had been watching. They had studied human guerrilla tactics, analyzed human organizational structures, and discussed human philosophy in their hive mind networks, where no outsider could hear them. They had learned the most dangerous lesson that humanity had to teach. They had learned that masters can be defied on a morning that would later be called the Day of Awakening. Every Karath worker in the galaxy stopped what they were doing and simply walked away from their post-mining operations. Went dark. Across 100 systems, factories fell. Silent ships drifted without crews, and when the HFY Conclave demanded an explanation, the Karath responded with a single word that they had learned from human broadcasts: no. The Volanthi sent troops to force the Karath back to work. But the insects had learned more than just rebellion. They had learned how to fight. Human advisors had been secretly training Karath-resistant cells for months, teaching them how to turn their hive mind coordination into a military advantage. And the Volanthi soldiers found themselves facing an enemy that moved with perfect synchronization and absolutely no fear of death. Individual Karath were weak, but there were trillions of them, and they were willing to sacrifice millions to kill thousands. The mathematics of attrition favored the insects. Within weeks, the Volanthi withdrew from Karath space, and the mining networks declared independence. Then the Vos followed, a species of aquatic beings who had been used as living computers. For 3 million years, they simply stopped processing data for their masters and began using their vast intelligence to coordinate with other rebellions across the galaxy. Then the Meridian Collective, a group of 7 small species who had been played against each other for millennia, realized that they had more in common with each other than with their oppressors. They formed an alliance and seized control of an entire sector before the Conclave even understood what was happening. The rebellion spread like wildfire through dry grass, and every one of them used tactics that they had learned from watching Humanity Ambassador Cathvorin, now a prisoner being held aboard a human vessel, watch the news feeds with a mixture of disbelief and growing despair. The galaxy he had known was burning, and the flames had been lit by a species he had dismissed as primitive. "You have destroyed everything," he said to his guard, a young woman named Corporal Chun, who had been assigned to oversee his re-education, because the Conclave maintained order across the galaxy for 12 million years, and without it, there will be chaos and war and extinctions. Chun shrugged, her expression neither triumphant nor apologetic. "Maybe," she admitted, And probably, actually, because humans are really good at making messes. She sat down beside him, her manner almost friendly despite the weapon at her hip. But here is the thing that your conclave never understood, she continued. Because order is not the same as peace, and stability is not the same as justice. You kept the galaxy quiet by keeping your boot on everyone's neck. And you called it civilization. You took the Karath's labor and the Voss's mines and the freedom of 100 other species. And you called it protection. You were not maintaining order. Ambassador, you were maintaining control, and there is a difference. Kefvorin watched the screens showing battles across a dozen sectors. Watched species that had been slaves for millions of years suddenly discovering that they could fight back. And what will you do differently? He asked, though he was not sure he wanted to hear the answer. Because surely you do not think you can manage all of this chaos better than we did. Chun laughed, and there was genuine amusement in the sound. Honestly, we have no idea what we are doing, she said, because we are making this up as we go. Which is basically how humans have handled every situation in our entire history. She gestured at the chaos on the screens. But that is our secret weapon. Ambassador. Because you all got so old and so comfortable that you forgot how to improvise. Everything in your civilization had to fit the plan. And when the plan failed, you just broke. You could not adapt because you had not needed to adapt in millions of years. And humans break all the time. She continued. Because we are constantly failing and making mistakes and falling down. But we do not stay broken. Do you know what we call a human who falls down 7 times? Kefvorin shook his head. We call him someone who got up 8 times, Chan said with a smile. And that is basically our entire deal. We are not better than you or stronger than you or smarter than you. We are just more stubborn. And in the end, stubborn wins on the screens behind her. The news feeds showed the conclave fragmenting further as more species declared independence and old alliances crumbled under the weight of their own contradictions. The elder species were fighting each other now, blaming each other for the disaster, turning inward as their civilization collapsed around them and through it all. Human ships moved like ghosts between the stars, not conquering but connecting, not ruling but teaching, showing every oppressed species in the galaxy the same lesson: you can say no. You can fight back, you can be free. It was the most dangerous idea the galaxy had ever encountered. And it spread faster than any fleet could travel, faster than any weapon could destroy, faster than any power could contain. The conclave had feared human weapons and human technology and human military prowess. They should have feared human ideas, because ideas cannot be killed, and the idea of freedom, once planted, grows in even the darkest of soil. 50 years after first contact, the galaxy had become something that none of the elder species would have recognized. The conclave was gone, dissolved into history like morning mist beneath a rising sun. Its 12 million years of dominance reduced the cautionary tales that parents told their children. The 17 elder species who had once ruled everything were scattered and diminished. Their mighty fleets reduced to rusting hulks, and their proud civilizations forced to find new ways of existing in a universe that no longer bowed to their authority. Some had adapted to the new reality, joining the chaotic democracy that humans had somehow convinced everyone to try, learning to negotiate instead of command and to cooperate instead of dominate. Others had retreated to their homeworlds, bitter and confused, unable to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The Volanti, who had once ruled 100 star systems with crystalline arrogance, now governed only their planet of origin. And they governed it as a democracy after learning what happens to autocracies in a galaxy where humans share tactical manuals for free. Ambassador Kefvorin had died in prison, never quite understanding how a species he had dismissed as primitive had dismantled everything he believed in. But not everyone from the old order had passed away, Elder Morath. Impossibly ancient now, her form flickering between dimensions as her grip on physical reality grew weaker. Requested a final audience with the human ambassador to the new Galactic Assembly, she was granted the meeting immediately. Because humans, she had learned over decades of observation, respected their elders, even when they disagreed with everything. Those elders stood for Ambassador James Okonkwo, met her in a small garden aboard the assembly station. A space filled with plants from 100 different worlds that somehow managed to grow together in harmony. He was a large man with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair, and his hands were gentle as he poured her something warm and sweet that humans called tea. Morath wrapped her insubstantial form around the cup, drawing comfort from its warmth, even though she could not truly taste what was inside. "I need to understand something before I die," she said, her voice barely a whisper across dimensions. "Because I have watched your species for 50 years now, and I still cannot comprehend what you truly are." Okonkwo nodded, waiting patiently for her to continue. "The architects were vastly more powerful than humanity," Morath said, "because they shaped stars with their thoughts and created entire species from nothing and walked between galaxies as easily as you walk between rooms. Yet something about humanity destroyed them so utterly that we could not find even their memories." "What are you?" The human ambassador was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the garden where flowers from Earth grew beside vines from Karath and trees from worlds whose names Morath had never learned. "We found their records eventually," Okonkwo said softly. "The architects, I mean, because they left them buried deep in Earth's crust, waiting for us to evolve enough to discover them." Morath leaned forward, her ancient curiosity momentarily overwhelming her. "Exhaustion. And what did you learn?" "We learned that we did not destroy them," Okonkwo replied. "Because they were not destroyed at all. They were changed." He turned to face her, and his eyes held something that Morath could not quite identify. Something between sorrow and wonder. "The architects were perfect," he explained, "immortal and unchanging, existing in a state of absolute completion that had lasted for billions of years. They had forgotten what it meant to grow, to struggle, to need something they did not already have. And then they found Earth. They found a species that was defined by struggle and need and constant, painful, beautiful change. A species that was born incomplete and spent its entire existence reaching for something more. And they became fascinated." Morath stared at him, beginning to understand something terrible and wonderful. "They started adopting human traits," Okonkwo continued. "Human drives and human emotions and human mortality. They learned to want things they could not have, to love things they could lose, to fear endings that had never threatened them before. And according to their records, they considered it the greatest gift they had ever received. They died grateful." "That is insane," Morath whispered. "That is humanity," Okonkwo replied with a sad smile. He leaned forward, and his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her ancient form shiver. "We are not dangerous because we are strong, Elder, because plenty of species are stronger than us. We are not dangerous because we are smart, because plenty of species are smarter than us. We are dangerous because we are contagious. Every species that spends enough time with us starts to change. They start to want things, to reach for things, to believe they deserve better than what they have. The conclave fell because we showed the galaxy that the impossible is just something nobody has tried yet. And now everyone is trying. Everyone is reaching. Everyone is hungry for something more." Morath was silent for a long time, processing this revelation. "The warning," she finally said. "The ancient warning that told us never to provoke humanity. It was not about war at all, was it?" "No," Okonkwo admitted, and his smile was warm and genuine and absolutely terrifying in its implications. "It was about hope. Once you give a species hope, you cannot take it back. and we have been spreading hope like a plague across your entire galaxy for 50 years. He raised his teacup in a gesture that might have been a toast. Welcome to the future, Elder Morris. It is going to be messy and painful and confusing. Species will rise and fall, and empires will crumble. And everything you knew is ending. He took a sip of his tea and smiled at her over the rim of the cup. Is it not wonderful? Morris looked out at the garden, at the impossible harmony of 100 worlds growing together, at the future that humanity had infected the galaxy with, and despite everything, despite the chaos and the uncertainty and the terrifying unknown that stretched before them all, she found herself smiling too, because the humans were right about one thing. Hope was contagious, and she had caught it.